Hello. Today is March 25th, and today is the day one of our 21 days lockdown as directed by the government of India. And I think this is the time when we hold on to the best of our energies, the courage, the happiness that we have in us, utilize our resources wisely, and stay home, prevent any further damage than the virus has already caused, and come out of uh, this this situation healthy, hopeful, and smiling. So it's going to be a long journey, 3 weeks, and we all hope for the best. It's all in our hands. We can make it happen. So stay indoors, stay safe, please. Um, Today, I thought I'll pick up a story which is by a person who is uh, considered as God by many in my generation, and he's the cultural icon of for the for the entire nation, and you know, from the place I come from, he's no less than something that people grow up with. He's none other than Mr. Satyajit Ray. I have a collection of his stories in English. It's a short story collection. 49 stories are there in this book. Um, I have read these stories mainly in Bangla, and the particular reason I'm having this recording at this time is the fondest of the memories of these stories are on lazy afternoons. So today is a holiday. 25th of March 2020 is Ugadi, and I wish everybody there out there a happy new year. Um, I think that's the time we can wish this the most sincerely. So let's go forward and jump into the story. So the name of the story that I have picked today is A Duel in Lucknow. There is a character called Uncle Tarini, and he is he is one of those characters created by Mr. Ray, and is known for his love for travel and the amazing experiences he has had in his lifetime uh, during his travels in the youth in the country. So we'll get on. So here we go. A Duel in Lucknow by Mr. Satyajit Ray. The translation is also by Mr. Satyajit Ray. Do you know what the word duel means? Asked Uncle Tarini. Oh, yes, said Napla. Duel means double. Some actors play dual role in films. That's not what I meant, Uncle Tarini said, laughing. DUEL, not DUAL. Duel means a fight between two persons. Yes, yes, of course, we all shouted together. I once read upon duels out of curiosity, went on Uncle Tarini. The practice of dueling spread from Italy to the rest of Europe in the 16th century. Swords were then part of a gentleman's dress, and swordplay or fencing was part of their education. If a person was insulted by someone, he would immediately challenge the other to a duel in order to save his honor. Whether the honor was saved or not depended on the challenger's skill as a swordsman. But even if skill was lacking, the duel took place, because to swallow an insult was looked upon in those days as height of cowardice. In the 18th century, the pistol replaced the sword as the dueling weapon. This led to so many deaths that there was a move to pass a law against dueling. But if one ruler banned it, the next one would relax the law and dueling would rear its head again. Uncle Tarini took a sip of black tea, cleared his throat, and continued. A duel was fought according to a strict set of rules. Both parties had to use identical weapons. Each had to have his second or referee to see that no rule were broken. An obligatory gap of 20 yards was necessary between the two opponents, and both pistols had to be fired at the moment the challenger's second gave the command. As usual, we were impressed with Uncle Tarini's fund of knowledge, which was as rich as his fund of experiences. We knew that all this rigmarole, or instructive information as Uncle Tarini called it, was a prelude to yet another episode from his colorful life. All we had to do was bide our time before he would be regaled with what Uncle Tarini called fact, but which struck us as being stranger than fiction. I don't know if you are aware, resumed Uncle Tarini, that a famous duel took place in our country. In fact, in Calcutta itself, 200 years ago. Even Mapla didn't know, so we all shook our heads. One of the two who fought was a world famous person, the Governor General Warren Hastings. His adversary was Philip Francis, a member of the Viceroy's Council. Hastings had written an acrimonious letter to Francis, which made the latter challenge him to a duel. You know the National Library in Alipur. The duel took place in an open spot not far from there. Since Francis was the challenger, a friend of his procured the pistols and served as his second. The pistols were both fired at the same time, but only one of the two men was felled by a bullet. Philip Francis. Luckily, the wound was not fatal. That's history, said Napla. It's time we had a story, Uncle Tarini. Of course, living in the 20th century, you couldn't possibly have had taken part in a duel. No, said Uncle Tarini. But I watched one. Really? He took another sip of black tea, lit an export quality beedi, and began his story. I was then living in Lucknow. I had no regular job and no need for one because a couple of years earlier I had won 1.5 lakh rupees in the Rangers lottery. The interest of it was enough to keep me going. This was in 1951. Everything cost less, and being a bachelor, one could live in a comfort of 6 or 700 rupees a month. I lived in a small bungalow on Latouche Road, wrote occasional pieces for The Pioneer, and paid regular visit to an auction house in Hazratganj. In those days, one could still pick up objects belonging to the time of the great Nawabs. One made a sizable profit by buying them cheap and selling them at a good price to American tourists. I was both a dealer and a collector. Although my sitting room was small, it was crowded with objects bought at this auction house. At the auction house one Sunday morning, I saw a brown mahogany box lying amongst the items to be sold. It was 1.5 feet long, about 8 inches wide, and 3 inches high. I couldn't guess what it contained, and this made me very curious. There were other things being auctioned, but I had my eyes only on the mahogany box. After an hour of disposing of other objects, the auctioneer picked up the box. I sat up expectantly. The usual praises were sung. May I now present to you something most attractive and unique? Here you are, ladies and gentlemen, as good as new, although more than 100 years old. A pair of dueling pistols made by the famous firm of Joseph Manton. A pair without compare. I was immediately hooked. I had to possess those pistols. My imagination had started working. I could see the duelists facing each other, the bullets firing, and the bloody conclusion. As my mind worked and the bidding went on, I suddenly heard a Gujarati gentleman cry out, 750. I topped it at once with a bid of 1,000 rupees. This ended the bidding, and I found myself the owner of the pistols. Back home, I opened the box and found the pistols were even more attractive than I thought they were in the auction house. They were truly splendid specimens of the gunsmith's art. The name of the maker was carved on the butt of the pistol. From the little I had read about weapons, I knew that Joseph Manton was a most distinguished name among the gunsmiths of 18th century Britain. I had arrived in Lucknow 3 months earlier. In the evenings, I usually stayed at home writing or listening to music on the gramophone. I had just sat down at my desk to write a piece on Hastings Francis encounter when the doorbell rang. Perhaps a customer. I had already built a small reputation as a supplier of antiques. I opened the door and found an Englishman standing outside. He was in his mid 40s and looked clearly like someone who had spent a long time in India. Indeed, he could well have been an Anglo Indian. Good evening. I returned his greeting and he said, Do you have a minute? There is something I wanted to discuss with you. Please come in. There was no trace of an Indian accent in that man's speech. I could see him more clearly by the light of the lamp once he came in. He was a good looking man with blue eyes, reddish brown hair, and a stout moustache. I apologized for not being able to offer him any liquor and asked him if he would care for a cup of coffee or tea. The man refused, saying that he had just had dinner. Then he came straight to the reason for his visit. I saw you at the auction house in Hasratganj this morning. Were you there too? Yes, but you were probably too preoccupied to see me. The fact is, my mind was on something which had caught my eye. And you succeeded in acquiring it. A pair of dueling pistols made by Joseph Manton. You were very lucky. Uh, did they belong to someone you know? Yes, but he has been dead for a long time. I didn't know where the pistols went after his death. Do you mind if I take a look at them? I happen to know an interesting story about them. I handed him the mahogany box. He opened the lid, took out one of the pistols, and held it in the light of the lamp. I could see that his eyebrows had gone up and a faraway look had come to his eyes. Do you know, he said, that these pistols were used in a duel which was fought in this very city? A duel in Lucknow? Yes, it took place 100 years ago. In fact, it will be exactly 100 years, 3 days from now, on October the 16th. How extraordinary! But who fought the duel? The Englishman returned the pistol and sat down on the sofa. The whole thing was so vividly described to me that I can almost see it before my eyes. There was a very beautiful woman in Lucknow in those days. She was called Annabella, the daughter of Dr. Jeremiah Hudson. She was not only beautiful but also extremely gifted. She could ride a horse and wield a gun as well as any man. Besides all these, she was an accomplished singer and dancer. A young portrait painter, John Illingworth by name, had just arrived in Lucknow hoping for some commission for the Nawab himself. When he heard of Annabel's beauty, he turned up in the house of Dr. Hudson with an offer to paint her portrait. Illingworth got the commission, but before the portrait was finished, he had fallen deeply in love with the sitter. Some time earlier, Annabel had been to a party where she had met Charles Bruce, a captain in the Bengal regiment. Bruce, too, had lost his heart to Annabella at first sight. Soon after the party, Bruce called on Annabella at her residence. He found her seated on the veranda, posing for her portrait to a stranger. Illingworth was an attractive young man, and it took little time for Bruce to realize that he had a rival in that painter. Now, Bruce regarded painters with scant respect. On this occasion, he chose to make a remark to Anne Illingworth in the presence of Annabella, which clearly showed his disdain. As befits the practitioner of a gentle art, Illingworth was of mild dispositions. Nevertheless, the insult in the presence of the woman he loved was something he couldn't swallow. He challenged Bruce to a duel forthwith. Bruce took up the challenge, and the date and time of the duel were settled on the spot. Now, I suppose you know that each participant in a duel has to have a second. I nodded. Usually the second is a friend of the challenger, said the man. Illingworth's circle of acquaintance in Lucknow was not very large, but there was one whom he could call a friend. This was a government employee by the name of George Drummond. Drummond agreed to be his second and to procure a pair of identical pistols. On the opposite side, Charles Bruce asked his friend Philip Moxon to be his second. The day of the duel drew near. Everyone knew that what the outcome would be because Charles Bruce was a superb marksman, while Illingworth was not nearly as adept with the gun as with a paintbrush. He paused. Anxiously, I asked, "What happened next?" The Englishman smiled and said, "You can find that out yourself." How? Every year on October the 16th, the duel is reenacted. Where? In the same spot where it took place? To the east of Dilkusha, below a tamarind tree by the river Gomti. What do you mean by reenacted? Just what I say. If you were to come at 6 in the morning the day after tomorrow, you will see the whole incident before your eyes. But that is impossible. Do you mean to say? You don't have to take my word for it. All you have to do is go and see for yourself. I would like that very much, but I don't think I could find my way there. I haven't been here long. Do you know Dilkusha? Yes, I do. I will wait outside the gate of Dilkusha at 5:45 in the morning of October the 16th. Very well. He bade me good night and left. It was then that it struck me that I hadn't asked his name, but then he hadn't asked mine either. Anyway, the name wasn't important. It was what he had said that mattered. It was hard to believe that Lucknow had been the scene of such chivalry and romance, and that I was in possession of a pair of pistols which had played an important part in it. But who really won that hand of Annabella in the end? And which of the two did she really love? The alarm clock woke me up at 5 on the morning of the 16th. I had a cup of tea, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and set off for Dilkusha in a tanga. Dilkusha had been at one time Nawab Sadat Ali's country house. There used to be a spacious park around it where deer roamed and into which an occasional leopard strayed from the forest nearby. Now only the shell of the house remained, and a garden which was tended and open to the public. At 20 to 6, I reached my destination. In my best Urdu, I told the Tangawala to wait as I would be going back home in half an hour's time. I had to walk only a few steps from the Tanga to find the Englishman waiting for me under an Arjun tree. He said he had arrived only 5 minutes ago. We started to walk. In a few minutes, we found ourselves in an open field. The view ahead was shrouded in mist. Perhaps it had been misty on the morning of the duel too. Another minute's walk brought us to a dilapidated cottage, which must have belonged to some Englishman in the last century. We stood with our backs to the ruins and faced east. In spite of the mist, I could clearly make out the huge tamarind tree at some distance from us. To our right, about 20 yards away, stood a large bush. Beyond the tree and the bush, I could dimly discern the river, its water reflecting the eastern sky, just beginning to turn pink. The surrounding was eerily quiet. "Can you hear it?" asked my companion suddenly. Yes, I could. The sound of horses' hooves. I can't deny that I felt a chill in my bones. At the same time, I was gripped by a keen anticipation of a unique experience. Now I saw the two riders. They rode down from our left, pulled up below the tamarind tree, and dismounted. "Are those two the duelists?" I asked in a whisper. "Only one of them," said my companion. "The taller of the two is John Illingworth, the challenger. The other is his friend and second, Hugh Drummond. You can see Drummond is carrying the mahogany box." Indeed he was. I couldn't make out the faces in the mist, but I could clearly see the box. gave me a very strange feeling to see it in the hands of someone when I knew the same box was at this very moment lying in my house, locked in my trunk. Presently, two more riders arrived and dismounted. "The blonde one is Bruce," whispered my companion. Drummond now consulted a pocket watch and nodded to two duelists. The two men stood face to face. Then they turned right about and took 14 steps each in the opposite directions from the other. Then they stopped, swung around, and faced each other again. The pistols were slowly raised, and they took aim. The next moment, the silence was broken by Drummond's command, "Fire!" The shots rang out, and I was astonished to see both Bruce and Illingworth fall to the ground. But there was something else that caught my eyes now. It was a hazy figure of a woman running out from behind the bush and disappearing into the mist away from the group around the tamarind tree. "Well, you saw what happened," said my companion. "Both men were killed in the duel." I said, "Very well, but who was the woman I saw running away?" "That was Annabella." "Annabella?" Annabella had realized that Illingworth's bullet wouldn't kill Bruce, and yet she wanted both of them out of the way. So she hid behind the bush with a gun which she fired at Bruce the moment the command was given. Illingworth's bullet went wide off the mark. But why did Annabella behave like that? Because she loved neither of the two men. She realized that Illingworth would be killed in the duel, leaving Bruce free to court her against her will. She didn't want that because she loved someone else. Someone she went on to marry and find happiness with. I could see the scene of the 100 years ago, swiftly fading before my eyes. The mist was growing thicker by the minute. I was thinking of the extraordinary Annabella when a woman's voice startled me. "George! Georgie!" "That's Annabella," I heard my companion saying. I turned to him and froze. Why was he suddenly dressed in the clothes of 100 years ago? "I haven't had the chance to introduce myself," he said in a voice which seemed to have come floating across a vast chasm. "My name is George Drummond. It was me, Illingworth's friend, that Annabella really loved. Goodbye." On getting home, I opened the mahogany box and took out the pistols once more. Their muzzles were warm to the touch, and an unmistakable smell of gunpowder wafted up to my nostrils. Thank you. So, that was the story of a duel in Lucknow. I'm sorry for the fumblings and the mistakes I made while reading. So, anyway, I hope you like it, and if there is a chance again, we'll read out some more. And lastly, we all at Narration are trying to give you some company in such moments. So stay home, stay safe, stay healthy.